Jesus talked an awful lot about money. He's constantly preaching sermons on money. But you would think that there'd be this huge compilation of sermons of Jesus on money. But in reality, he just preached some of the same messages over and over and over again, just so that you and I could remember them. And I think this is so important, because you and I can get some truth in us, and then we can start living life. And as we live life, then we can forget it, and we need reminded, and we need reminded all the time that we don't trust our money. I think, in fact, when you get out a dollar bill, it is great to look at it and say, it says, in God we trust. We don't trust in stuff. And so I just want to remind you that of all of the messages Jesus preached, here's kind of a compilation of the themes of what he talked about. Number one, it all comes from God and goes back to God. Like everything that we have is God's. Like he's the owner of everything, and we just get to be what's called stewards of it for a little bit of time. It just kind of flows through us, but it's God's. When we remember that, it's such a big deal. Like it's not ours to keep. Sometimes it feels like, this is my stuff and everybody's trying to get my stuff, but it's not my stuff. It's God's stuff. Sermon number 2 that he always teaches is, one day you and I will give an account. We will stand before him and we will give an account for our words, for our actions, for our love, for our thoughts. We will give an account, even how we spend our money. Like we will give an account to him one day. That's what stewardship is all about. Another message that Jesus preached all along is, you can't keep stuff, but you can send it on ahead. And so these are messages that we just need to be reminding. And can you build them in to your family when you're talking about stuff with your kids? Can you be like saying this all the time to your kids? Like, it all belongs to God. It all belongs to God. It's God's. Sometimes when we'll have an accident around the house, or something will happen where we're going to lose some money and paying for a bill, I'll just say to God in prayer, well, it's your stuff. I guess if you want your stuff, if you want your money to go to that repair person, then great. Isn't that different than like, oh man, I've just lost some of my stuff? It all belongs to God. It starts with him. And Jesus teaches this over and over again using a variety of different ways, but one of his favorite is using parables. Parables are stories that get you leaning one direction and they send you back another. Parables are stories that get you thinking this story is going to go this way, when in reality, this is the point that he's trying to get at. So today we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 16. I hope that you can dig in, that you can study this passage. It's a really important passage. It's called, other people have called it the parable of the shrewd manager. Some have called it the parable of the dishonest manager. But every passage in the Bible comes in context. So Luke chapter 16, I'm going to ask you a really deep question here today. What chapter is right in front of Luke chapter 16? Anybody can think about it? Luke 15. Thank you, Caleb. He was here first service. He's the only one. Luke 15 is before Luke 16. Luke 15, at the very end, what you have is this passage that describes a man that went out and wasted all of his father's possessions. That it's the parable of the prodigal son. Prodigal means wasteful. And that he got his inheritance from his father, and then he proceeded to go out and waste everything of it. And after he had wasted it, he came to his senses and he wondered to himself, can I go back to my father? And not only could he go back to his father, but the way home to his father was shorter because his father came running towards him. I need you to understand that, because has anybody ever wasted any of the stuff God has given you? Like every one of us, you need to understand this, that this passage, when he talks about another wasteful manager, is right after a passage where he talks about somebody that squandered every single thing that God had given him. And not only did God accept him back, he threw a party for him. And so today it's not about like regret and going back and saying, like, I wish I could have done things. Every one of us wishes we could have done things differently. This is not a looking back, it's a receiving grace for this moment. But fortunately, this passage follows that one, and it talks about like another person that's very wasteful with what God has given to him. And it's kind of a different kind of a story to this. So Luke chapter 16, verse 1, let's just dig into this and not miss any of it. Jesus told his disciples, so he's trying to make disciples. He's trying to make followers of his, and he's teaching them this passage. There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. In this parable, who do you think the rich man is? It's God, because God owns it all. And it's in every one of his teachings. God owns it all. Fortunately, in Philippians chapter 4:13, it says, "And God shall supply all of our needs according to his riches in glory." Have you memorized it? Memorize it. He's a provider. He is the rich one that owns absolutely everything, and he provides for us. So there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. This manager is somebody who is entrusted to care for his stuff. And you know what? That's really who we are. This is Jesus' teaching. It all belongs to God. He entrusts us with stuff, and we have to give an account for this. So he called him in, and he asked him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer." I think this is kind of crazy. He said, "Come in and tell me how you've done, but you're fired." Like he knows that when he gets there, he is going to be fired. He's even told beforehand that he's going to be fired. And so he says this, the manager said to himself. You ever talk to yourself? This guy is. "What should I do now?" What should I do now? It's a great question. In fact, it's probably a great question for every single one of us. Like where I'm at right now, what should I do now? He's saying, I'm in a pickle. I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I'm losing my job. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. I think this is funny. Like, what should I do now? Well, I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. And you could almost feel like saying to him, you should have thought about that before you wasted the possessions. Like you should have thought about that earlier. But he wasn't thinking about the future earlier. He was thinking about now, and he remained thinking about right now. What should I do now? You know, a lot of our problems are that we think about right now. That's why they have impulse buying in the aisle. You go ready to get the cash register, and they've got stuff on both sides. Why? They don't want you to think. They just want you to buy. And I just want you to know, you've heard my Menard story of donuts and everything in the aisle. That wasn't impulse buying, because I chose that aisle specifically to buy that item. I want to make sure that's a joke, by the way. You can laugh at the jokes. What should I do now? Are you a person that in terms of God's stuff you think about now, or do you think about the future? There's so much wisdom when we begin to think about not just right now, but we think about later. So he says, what should I do now? So this is after thinking, he came up with this idea. He called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 900 gallons of olive oil. Now, in this passage, this is not how much do you have. This is how much do you owe. Anybody have a debt, like something that you owe, and you think about your debt? This person had a debt of 900 gallons of olive oil. I just want to say, I think that he's got an olive oil problem here. That's a major deal. 900 gallons of olive oil. If we would have a barrel, A barrel up here would be about 50 gallons. So if you begin to think about 2 barrels, make 100, 18 barrels of olive oil up here. That's an awful lot of money. And guess what he says? The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Cut it in half. Why did he say sit down quickly? Because this guy doesn't have much time. What's coming up? He knows he's going to be fired. He knows he's got to go give an account. And he's like, in a hurry, sit down quickly, make it 450. Now, why did he do that? Well, what would you do if you had a debt and it was cut in half? Think about your banker showing up at your door and saying, you know what? Hey, just got some news for you. We've just decided to cut your debt in half. What would you do? Whoa, wait, wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be so exciting? And then as the person leaves, when you say, hey, if there's anything I can ever do for you, let me know. And the guy, don't worry, I will. Don't worry, I will. He goes to another one. Well, that worked out really good. He went to the second one. How much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat. If we have any farmers here, like when you see dump truck loads going by, like 1,000 bushels would be that. Like, this is a huge amount of wheat. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. So he gives him a 20% discount. And can you hear the guy saying to him again, well, whoa, that's so neat. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know. And don't worry, I will. He's finally starting to think. And what is he thinking about? What's the difference of what he's thinking about? Before he was, what do I do now? What's he thinking about? What's the change? He's not thinking about now. He's thinking about the future. And this is the key to what Jesus is talking about. He's not thinking about right this second. He's now thinking about the future. The master commended the dishonest manager. That's where the shift goes. Like, you'd think that he called in to give an account, and now the manager's going to go, wait, you were going to get fired, and right before you get fired, you go do all of that? Like I'm taking you to court. He's like, no, oh, wow. Finally, you get it. Finally, you're not just thinking about now. Finally, you're thinking about the future. And he commended him because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, this is the key. Jesus is like, he emphasizes this. Tell you the truth. Use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Verse 9 is the key to the whole passage. Use it. Use your stuff that you can't keep in order to be welcomed into eternal dwellings, like to invest in people. Doesn't this sound like last week's sermon? The reason why it is last week's sermon. It's another book, a whole different topic, but Jesus uses different illustrations and different topics to say, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Think about heaven. And he's constantly reminding of us of this. The things that we just do now with our time, with our energy, with our money, we can think about now, or we can think about eternity. I know this about every one of us. If I look at your regrets in life, it was that you were probably thinking about now. Like when we get so focused on now, when we get focused on next steps and things, we just miss what can come later on and the blessings that can come later on. And just begin to, you want this, when we sung the song, I want blessing to go for 1,000 generations. Does anybody want that? What if we lived and made decisions so that we really would have blessing that goes on for 1,000 generations? So, it's not about your or my jobs. It's not about your or my marriages. It's not about now. It is about all of eternity. And we begin to say, God, how do I live life differently today so that I'm thinking about later on coming up? And that's just what Jesus was teaching. Don't think about now, think about later. If we go down to verse 13, he says, The same thing that was in last week's message. No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. He doesn't say you shouldn't or it's not a very wise thing to do. It's like you can't. You begin to serve money and it begins to take over. You begin to make bad decisions. You begin to serve stuff and you begin to make bad decisions in terms of all of the relationships that are around you. And this is so key. The funeral that I did yesterday was a fun funeral for me. It's a person that I love dearly. Her name's Marcia. Marcia's 87 years old, died at 87 years old. Marcia lived over in the Elkhart area, but she actually was born in Fort Wayne and went to Northside High School. Marcia was the movie A League of Their Own? She was in that generation of women baseball. She was a semi-pro women's baseball player. She told me that she could, on her knees, throw a ball from catcher to second base. She was just like, she literally was Dottie on A League of Her Own. Just an amazing woman. She became a skater. She had 6 kids. She was just the funniest lady you could imagine. When I came to that particular church, she was 69 years old, and she started working in children's ministry. I don't know, she worked until age 87. When she died, she was still teaching a Sunday school class. The people that say, well, I've done my duty, I've done my time. She went on to the very, very end in doing that. She was a very servant's heart. She would often, when I get stressed, it all goes into my neck and gives me headaches. And so every once in a while, she would come in my office and she would just rub the knots right out of my neck. And she would have no mercy on me. She just dig right in. And one time she drove an hour to come to Columbia City in her 80s to give me a neck rub. Isn't that special? And that's a wonderful lady. You think it's special, but she was hilarious too. When we would go down through the hallway, she'd see me in church, and there'd be people around me and stuff. One time, we were walking through the hallway, and she said to me loud enough for everybody to hear, "Pastor, if you're ever kinky again, give me a call." Again, she's in her 80s. She was talking about my neck being kinky, by the way. And just hilarious lady. But this is the thing I love about her the most. She spent the last 20 years of her life with her casket in her garage. She literally bought a casket. She bought an Amish-built casket. She stored it in her garage so that her family, when they came to see her, when walking through her garage, would see her casket. When she drove into her garage, she'd get out and she'd walk by her casket every day. And you live differently when your casket is in your garage. Completely differently. When you're trying to get your cooler out and you open up your casket because that's where you've stored your cooler, you go on your little trip a little differently, don't you? When your car battery doesn't start and you get in your casket to get out the jumper cables, you don't sweat things, do you? It changes everything. I wonder what it would be like if we would store our stuff in our casket. Wouldn't that change everything? Wouldn't you, if you had to dig into your casket to get your treasure, wouldn't it change your life when you'd realize, whoa, I'm going to replace this. They're going to take my treasure out. They're going to get out my cooler. They're going to get out my jumper cables, and they're going to put me in this. Isn't that wisdom? Doesn't that change our lives? And we realize that our stuff is not what makes us. And the reason why Jesus preached this all the time is not because he knew we needed 20 messages on it. We needed this one message 20 times, over and over again. You can walk out of there and go, that was the best message, and you will forget it, and you'll need to be reminded of it. What is it that Jesus is saying? Stop thinking about today. Start thinking about eternity. Stop treasuring your stuff because it's laughable. You will one day be in a casket, and it will one day be in a garage sale. And they'll be selling your stuff one day. And somebody else will be calling it your treasure, their treasure. Second person that I respect and love so dearly was a man named Bob. Again, Bob was in his 80s when he passed away. Bob was a Ford mechanic. I probably have talked to you about Bob. Bob, I would go to his house, and he would help me work on my old Ford pickup truck, and he could just figure out anything that had to do with that thing. Went over to Bob's house one time. He built a pond behind his house. By the way, if you went into his house, it was built in the 1960s, and if you walked through his house, all of his furniture was 1960s furniture. It's like he bought it and furnished it, and that was enough. This couch will do me for the rest of my life. And one day I asked him, hey, how deep is that pond that's out there? And he said, well, it's about up to here if you're standing on the back wheel of your tractor. Like, what? And he said, well, I backed it in there one time on accident. And he didn't get rid of his tractor. He tore it all apart. He fixed it up again, and he didn't, it wasn't ruined. He just kept fixing it, kept working on it. When I would visit him, I would walk in, and no kidding, every time I visited him, his Bible was open on his dining room table. And you could ask him, hey, what's your reading right now? And he'd tell you what he was reading in his Bible. And one particular day when I went over there, and his Bible was open, and we were talking, and he said, Pastor, I've got cancer. I don't have a will prepared. I really just want every penny of my stuff to go to win people to Jesus. Can you help me with that? And so we got an attorney and another friend, a funeral director involved. We got three guys that were involved in that. And he just went through and he said, I just want this amount of money to go to my church, and I want this amount of money to go to the Billy Graham Association, and I want this amount of money to go to a food pantry. And here was a man that had hardly anything, but he gave away $800,000 when he died. And every penny of it was to win people to Jesus. There are scholarships set up for people going into ministry. Caleb got a seminary scholarship from Bob. There's this guy, his money is still being invested and being spent to win people to Jesus. And I think, who is the fool? Remember, he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And we just want to say, what would it be like if we would just look at our stuff, we would look at our time, we'd look at our energy, our resources, we'd look at everything, and we would say, well, what do I do now for eternity? God, what do I do with my money now so that my kids would experience generational blessing after blessing after blessing? Perhaps that would change the way we give to them and the things that we spend on them and the ways that we teach. This is what Jesus taught, and this is what he taught over and over and over again. It all belongs to God. We get to keep it for a little bit of time. We give an account, and one day you're not a fool if you think about what you could keep for all of eternity. I believe this sincerely. He says, who will be trusted with little things will be entrusted with very much. The little things are our stuff. It's just the things that God gives us here on earth. He entrusts it to us, and he wants to find out who's trustworthy so that he can give eternal blessings to them. Anybody want some of those? Well, we're going to pray. We're going to sing that song about the blessing of God, the generational blessing of God. I pray that as we sing that song, may his favor be upon us for 1,000 generations. Perhaps today you could just give him your stuff again and say, God, I don't want my stuff to be something I serve. I want to serve you. I want to bless you, and I want that to be a blessing for those ages to come. So let's stand as we sing that.
Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon and be gracious to you. Lord, turn his face toward you and give you peace. Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Lord, turn his face toward you and give you peace. And amen, 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 amen.
May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and your children, and your children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is for you, he is with you in the morning, in the evening, and you're coming, and you're going, and you're weeping and rejoicing. He is for you, 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 he is for you.
Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Lord, turn his face toward you and give you peace.
Song is even more wonderful than it sounds, because it's not the Lord bless you and keep you. It's the Lord continually blesses us. It's like it's repeated over and over again. So the Lord has continually blessed us. He's continually kept us. He's continually made his face to shine upon you. He's continually been gracious to us. He's continually lifted up his countenance upon us and given us peace. Hasn't he done that? He's blessed us. He's blessed us, and he will continue to do that this week. And do you know why he does that? He blesses us so that we can be a blessing. So I pray today that you would receive the blessing of God, and I pray that you could pass on the blessing of God to your children, to those you see, to your neighbor, to anybody that you come in contact with. I pray that you would be blessed so that you can go and be a blessing and be the church. In Jesus' name, amen.